Welcome back to my ever-evolving firearms channel. Today I've got a real treat for you. I have a gun that I've been really interested in picking up, and it's a Colt. And if you read the thumbnail, you already know what it is, but it is the Colt 2000. And this is a very interesting firearm, and we're going to go over it. We're going to go over how it works, and we're going to go over how it's manufactured, and just kind of some other historical stuff about it. All right, the Colt 2000. This is a very interesting firearm. Sometimes it's called the Colt All American, sometimes it's called the Colt 2000. And this is a very good specimen. It doesn't have the polished slide, and it is the polymer model. It has not been fired very much at all. And this is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the Colt Firearms Company, even though they really didn't have a whole ton to do with this gun. This particular firearm was designed by Eugene Stoner and Reed Knight. I don't really know how much of it was designed by who, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say this was mostly designed by Eugene Stoner. Stoner is a prolific gun designer, and this has some really innovative features in it. Reed Knight, to my knowledge, he hasn't really designed a ton. He mostly just is a manufacturer, and maybe he would know it from the manufacturer's side. Kind of like the relationship between like John Browning and the Winchester engineers. You know, Browning kind of made the gun, and the Winchester engineers made it producible. So this is a really unique firearm for Colt. It has a rotating barrel, so when you fire the gun, the barrel actually rotates. You can kind of see it rotate open, and it doesn't rotate very much. It's very smooth. Really the Achilles heel with this gun, and the thing that everyone complains about, is the trigger. And of course, it's clear. So the trigger is very long, but it's very smooth. It doesn't look like it's smooth. I'm doing it with my left hand, but it's very smooth, and it stages really well, and you know right where the break is. And you can feel it. You can feel that break. And it is a true double action. So even though it's a striker fired gun, it works the striker every time you pull the trigger. Like I said, it uses that rotating barrel. We're going to go over some interesting features. It has a 15-round magazine, and it looks kind of like it was based off the Beretta magazine, which most 9mm handguns at this time were. Beretta SIG type. It has a Colt logo on it. I'm assuming this was made by Checkmark Industries. Colt had them making their 9mm SMG magazines, and they probably just whipped these up too, because they were under contract to make Beretta magazines at the time, so wouldn't have been a stretch for them to make these. It has a very interesting floor plate, kind of this long plastic foot, and you can see how it goes in. That plastic floor plate matches very nicely with the bottom of the grip. Now, the grip on this is very interesting. I recently went to the John Browning Museum, and Val Browning had a couple of prototype 32 automatic police pistols that he submitted in 1948 that were not produced. And I found it very interesting because they are very similar to the way this gun looks. They were straight blowback. It wasn't enough a rotating barrel or anything, but Stoner was at Colt kind of on and off throughout his career, and maybe he saw a prototype of one of Val's pistols and thought that ergonomically the grip was interesting, because it is very ergonomic. It feels very good in the hand. So the trigger is 12 pounds, but it is very predictable. and it's very smooth. And you got to make sure you don't oil them. I'll show you in a minute why that's so important, why you shouldn't oil the rollers. So it's really easy to take down. You just pull the slide back till it locks, and then you have this pin that you push through the back side. Push that through, pull it until it stops. It is captive, but it likes to move back in, so you got to make sure that it's actually coming out. You release the slide, and it comes off. And this is something interesting because at the time, the vast majority of the polymer striker-fired pistols, you would actually have to pull the trigger in order to disassemble it. You didn't have to with this one, so that was definitely a plus for the police pistol market. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So you have a captive recoil spring, which is nice, and then you have this end cap. And there are a lot of people that complain about this end cap, thinking that somehow it promotes like bad accuracy or something, but a lot of firearms have actually done this throughout the years, and as long as there's a positive detent or something holding it in place, you really don't have a problem, because the slide moves also. So it's not like nothing's moving on this gun when it fires. It does move, the slide moves. So, but to get the barrel out, and more importantly to actually machine the slide, you have to have a removable end cap. So if you want to look at this barrel, it has multiple lugs on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lugs. And as you can see right there, they're kind of tapered. And it actually doesn't have to rotate very much to unlock, which is interesting. And if you'll notice, going back into the slide, it's harder to do this on camera. All right, going back into the slide, how it rotates, it actually doesn't have to rotate very much at all to unlock. And it's a very smooth pistol to fire, and it's very accurate, which kind of surprised me, even though it has a long trigger pull. But this is machined very well, and then of course it's proof tested by Colt. And then this journal right here is very tight, where it actually locks up with this front piece. It's a pretty tight gun, well machined, not a ton of machine marks. It looks pretty good. I mean, something like this would be fairly expensive to manufacture. These guns were produced from the early 90s, just in the early 90s for 4 or 5 years, I think, all the way up to like 1994, 1995 from 1990. So yeah, this was definitely a full-size 9mm handgun that was made, that was pretty decently machined. There are a lot of rumors that Colt actually didn't make very many parts for this gun, that they just assembled it, but it's hard to find information about that. There are a couple things that lead me to believe that might be correct. If you look at a lot of Colt's manufacturing at the time, you'll see that the machining can be a little crude, and this is not crude. This is very well machined. It was funny when I asked ChatGPT about it. It tried to tell me that Reed Knight actually made these at Knight's Armament, but he did not. Yeah, AI. So as you can see right here, you have these channels that are machined into the slide that fit the corresponding lugs on the barrel, and then you have this front cap, which also goes in there, and then there's a positive locking detent that locks it in place. And if that detent did go bad, you might have some accuracy issues, but it's a handgun, it's not a long gun, so it's not that much of a concern. And again, inside here, this is probably ground inside to match the grinding on the barrel. So it's very positive. So when this gun is assembled, the barrel isn't moving at all. There's no up and down or left or right movement in the gun. So it's got this kind of internal extractor, and of course the striker is right here. Pull that back and it fires, and then it's got a firing pin block safety, which is right here. It gets pushed up by another piece I'll show you in a minute. Very conventional 3-dot sights, kind of this plastic cap in the back to disassemble. You push this in, slide that off, and you pull the striker assembly out. Let's go ahead and look at the frame. All right, let's go ahead and look at the frame. And this is just some sort of injection molded polymer. You know, again, relatively inexpensive. There are some steel reinforcements, which I was glad to note. There are a couple here where the slide rides. And then, of course, this locking wedge right here, or the locking block where it actually cams against, is steel, and the slide rides on those. So it's not like this is all just riding on plastic. If you go ahead and you can pull the trigger assembly completely out, just pull up on this. There we go. And then here is the lower with the magazine release, and you can swap that mag release around. And here's your slide release. I do like the slide release location. It kind of reminds me of how SIG does it. It's very natural. You can do it with one hand. As a matter of fact, the controls are pretty easily manipulated with one hand on this gun. There aren't very many controls, but there are controls. See down here a metal shelf. Underneath that, that is where the trigger rides on these rollers. And that's why you don't want to gum this up with oil, because they'll seize and they won't actually roll. You want to use a little bit of graphite, and you can lubricate those with graphite. You have this thing that actually grabs the striker, pulls it back, and then it drops, and the striker fires. And then this is your trigger return spring, which is interesting. And this is the housing that it rides in. This is the camming block for the barrel, and what it locks into the frame with. So this is where your barrel sits, and it cams back and forth. It doesn't cam very much, just a little bit. And this right here is your this is a little plunger that pushes up on the firing pin block safety. It just kind of flops around in there right now. You can see it'll like pop up. Yeah, there it is. It's popping up. Okay, it goes back and forth. And that's because when you pull the trigger and you go all the way back to where it stops. Let me line this up here. There's your trigger. Goes inside this block. All right. And when it goes all the way back, it actually pushes up on that plunger right there, which in turn pushes up on the firing pin plunger in the slide. So yeah, this is it's a good idea. Doesn't have very many parts. Like I said, there's really a lot of innovation in this gun. There are a lot of cool ideas, like the roller trigger that goes straight back. It is very consistent and very repeatable. It's kind of hard to put that back into the gun when I'm doing it on camera, though, so I won't. But I do want to show you some other things. One of the things I want to show you is this detent right here. This just goes up and down. And when you actually pull the slide back, you can feel it. It goes into this matching cutout back here. And that's just a detent to keep the slide from moving. And its purpose maybe to retard the slide just a little bit, because it keeps it lined up. Might be to retard the slide just a hair and keep it there just another second while it unlocks. Probably keeps it from rattling too, which is nice. But yeah, it's just a little detent poking up, and then you've got your ejector right here, and then these are those metal rails I was talking about right back here. So again, pretty innovative design. I'm sure Colt really liked this because this design is definitely a lot cheaper to manufacture than a 1911. Let me put it back together and I'll give you kind of my... Well, actually, no, before I do that, why don't I go through, modern day cost for something like this. There are some elements in here that actually would be fairly expensive to manufacture. The lower right here, you're probably looking at, I'd say anywhere from $60 to $80, depending on how you did it. If you left it where you could actually remove these plates, it would cost more because you actually have to press bushings in. You have some more parts in here, and you're actually, because you're molding steel into the receiver, that does cost more because you're direct injection molding into the gun. So like I said, $60 to $80. The trigger mechanism, this is plastic, but then you have these roller bearings attached, and this is a little more complicated than most. The internals, especially like this block, you'd have to manufacture this block on a CNC machine. Probably the low receiver internals, like if you calculated how much this whole thing costs to manufacture, you'd probably be into it for over $100 at least. It wouldn't be super cheap, but it wouldn't be too expensive, especially when you're considering how much a 1911 costs to manufacture. A lot of your machine cost is going to actually be in the slide and the barrel, manufacturing these lugs, because you're going to have to cut the barrel and then cut the lugs. And if you mess up on the lugs, then you basically rifled the barrel for nothing. Plus, you're going to have to grind this part of the barrel right here so it fits in this muzzle cap, and then you're going to have to grind this muzzle cap too. So I would definitely say that, especially modern manufacture, you're going to be in the $200 to $250 range. So this would cost more to manufacture than, say, like a Glock. And that's another reason why, Gen 3 Glocks are cheap. They're that design style. You can make that whole gun for probably under $200 and sell it. So this whole gun would probably be more in the $350 to $400 range. Maybe not that much, maybe more like $325 to $375, but it certainly would cost more money to manufacture, than a Glock. But you got to remember that when this was made, Colt was manufacturing 1911s, and 1911s, they're very labor intensive, they're very machine intensive, and it was expensive to manufacture. So compared to a 1911, this was very inexpensive, especially if they were outsourcing as much of this stuff as they could really get away with. And the market they were going for was pretty much right up their alley. You got to remember, this is the early 90s. This is when all the Wonder Nines were hitting the market, and all these companies, they saw what was going on with Glock, and Glock was very successful, and they wanted that success. Here, let me put this together. All right, back together. So when you're comparing this to Colt, other Colt firearms, at the time they were still manufacturing their revolvers, which were very labor intensive, very expensive to manufacture, and they didn't really get a good return for their money. And then you have the 1911. And the 1911 is, again, expensive to manufacture, very labor intensive. And then you have Eugene Stoner comes along and basically is the answer to Colt's problem. Colt's problem at this time was most law enforcement agencies were transitioning from revolvers to automatic pistols. And you had, the Glock, Beretta, again at the time Smith & Wesson Sigma. You had the even the other Smith & Wesson series, the 59 series and stuff like that, they were vying for that same market. And Colt was in a lot of holsters, a lot of law enforcement holsters already as a revolver. And so it made sense for them to try and go after that exact same market. So when Stoner brought him this, and again, the gun that he brought them was shorter and more compact, and the trigger pull was much lighter. It was in the 6-pound range, and Colt got a hold of it and extended it to kind of a standard 4.5-inch length, and then extended it so it would take a 15-round magazine. And then I'm sure the lawyers had something to do with the fact that this thing is like 12 pounds. So if it was a 6-pound, and that's what I really feel with this pistol, is that this pistol is very accurate. When you stage that trigger and you reline up the sights, I mean, I was making headshots easily at 25 yards with this gun. Easily. Putting 3 to 5 rounds in the headshot. Now, I had to be very deliberate about it because it's a long trigger pull and it's heavy. But, you weren't going to get fast follow-up shots with this. But you got to remember what market Colt was trying to get with this gun. They were trying to get law enforcement agencies that were transitioning from revolvers to automatic pistols. So a double action only 9mm was a very smart thing to do. Didn't have any external safeties, was very easy to use, easy to take apart, as long as you don't take the trigger pack apart. That's kind of tricky to get back in there, but very smooth operating, very reliable. I haven't had any reliability problems, and I haven't really been able to track down information on any reliability issues with this gun. It did get some bad reviews when it came out, but I think a lot of that was just kind of bias. It's a really fun gun to shoot, and I would love to see it with a 6-pound trigger pull. I've been thinking about it. I probably will try and lighten it up or get another spring set or something like that. But there's some more complexities in there. It's not just the striker spring. There's also some return spring elements and everything. So it's not just one spring you'd have to replace. And it's also like a spring pack. If you want to go ahead and modify these, it's not going to be super easy. It's not going to be just a drop-in thing. But I do believe that this gun would be way better with a 6-pound trigger pull. And it would be something that would have given a Glock a run for its money and the other Wonder 9s a run for their money. Because it is accurate. It is reliable. As far as I can tell, I've shot a lot of rounds through it. And, it's... I've been watching a bunch of videos on this gun, and everyone just complains about the trigger. That's it. Everything else is just kind of anecdotal as far as reliability and how inaccurate it is, whatever. Because this thing is accurate and it's reliable. So, but remember, the market they're going for is double action pistols, double action revolvers, transitioning to autoloaders. This is easy to transition anyone in law enforcement that's used to using a revolver into using this automatic pistol, because it's got a double action trigger. They can stage it just like they would a revolver. So you have that safety element, because at the time the FBI was still teaching that when you draw your pistol, you put your finger on the trigger and then you would stage the trigger. That's literally what the FBI taught, because they were using mostly double action revolvers. So that was the concept. And then of course Colt lawyers said absolutely not. Can't put a 6-pound trigger on there. We got to put 12 pounds. And then of course 15 round magazine, so you get your capacity up. And you know what? This could have easily been a 17 round magazine if it wasn't for these dimples. Kind of the same problem with Beretta. They kind of purposefully limited the amount of ammunition that went into it, which is stupid. So again, I think this was a really good idea. I think the execution wasn't the best. The build quality is very nice, and I don't really have any complaints about it other than that trigger. Glad I was able to pick one up, and can't wait to do more shooting with it, and also try and do some modification to it to lighten up that trigger. So if you see one of these just kicking around, pick it up. They're not incredibly expensive. They didn't make very many of these. I want to say they only made around 20,000 of them. They made some with aluminum frame, some with polymer frame. But I think the one that would really sell to law enforcement during that time would have been polymer. I haven't found any information that it was adopted by any police agencies. I can't imagine it being with that trigger. But yeah, fun gun, fun piece of history. And then of course it's Eugene Stoner's last design before he passed away, and that's pretty big coming from a very prolific firearms designer. And this kind of has his signature all over it, with how ergonomic it is, and how soft recoiling this gun is. Like I can't explain to you how soft recoiling this gun is. You just have to experience it. But it doesn't flip, it pushes back. It's very soft recoiling, and very accurate. And I think this would have been an excellent transitioning service pistol for police officers going from a revolver to an autoloader, if they would have just lightened the trigger up a little bit. So yeah, go ahead and put your comments down below. If you disagree with me, throw them in there. I think this gun's pretty cool. I'm going to hang on to it and do a lot more shooting with it and do some modifications. So yeah.